Good day and welcome to this session on competitive negotiation. By the end of this session, you should be able to explain competitive negotiation, outline the grounds for using competitive negotiation, mention some merits and demerits of competitive negotiation, as well as describe the process of competitive negotiation. So, what then is competitive negotiation? Competitive negotiation is a method of acquiring goods, works, or services where a public purchaser evaluates and negotiates with multiple responsive tenderers. So it's usually or ideally suitable for acquisition of goods, especially where potential suppliers submit their tender document in response to an invitation to tender, and the procuring entity proceeds to engage in negotiations with each of the suppliers that submitted their tenders, or each of the suppliers whose tenders were deemed responsive. And when you say a tender is deemed responsive, it means that it has met the terms of the invitation to tender documents and has been submitted within the time that is allocated for submission of tenders. So it is used, or it can be used, where the procuring entity seeks to better define their requirements, and it is used in situations where the procuring entity cannot feasibly formulate their specifications, or it is also used in situations where open tendering procedures have failed to yield any success or results. Another instance for using competitive negotiation is where the procuring entity is sourcing or buying defense and security procurement which cannot be open to the general public, or which they couldn't have possibly included detailed information in the request for invitation to tender documents. It is finally used for research and development contracts. So in any of these circumstances, competitive negotiation can be applicable. So competitive negotiation is used in certain circumstances, one of which includes when it is not feasible to formulate specification. When the procuring entity cannot formulate specification, they can engage in negotiations with potential suppliers as to the details of what they require, how they are going to be met, and then some other terms that they would want to negotiate on. Then where the tendering procedures have failed to give a responsive tender. So where open tendering have been used and then a responsive tender, which is any tender that conforms to an invitation to tender document and has been submitted within the stipulated time on the invitation to tender document. It is also used for certain defense and security procurement, as well as for research and development contracts, which is not feasible to publicly make available the grounds for evaluating tenders unless negotiations are made as to how the contracts will be executed, because some of these security procurements cannot be executed in the open space and they would have to be subject to strict protocols, and then negotiations are required as to if suppliers can meet some of these protocols or not. Competitive negotiation is also used for circumstances of urgency where tendering would be impracticable. So when you cannot engage in open tendering, where you solicit tenders from a lot of suppliers, competitive tendering or competitive negotiation is key in getting the answers that you want. Then finally, competitive negotiation is used where, as a result of a catastrophic event, there is urgency and other methods are impracticable. In this instance, similar to restricted tendering, competitive negotiation can be used to acquire supplies to meet the emergency that has arisen as a result of the catastrophic event. So some of the advantages of competitive negotiation is that it is less formal method of procurement as compared to open competitive tendering. It is more flexible and less demanding in terms of administrative process and control because it doesn't follow any clearly laid down procedures, unlike open tendering where the organization or the procuring entity has to follow certain structured processes and award contracts in line with the invitation to tender documents. Competitive negotiation can be seen as an alternative to single source procurement because in the end you are engaging in negotiations with suppliers, and these suppliers are those that you think are capable and competent enough to provide the requirements of the organization. Hence, it is seen as more or less singling out a given set of suppliers and engaging them to provide your requirements for you. The contractor is able to explain and justify the elements of the tender, which may lead to arrangements for sharing risk. So, just like the security example I gave, if you require security supplies, you can engage in negotiation with the supplier as to how the items are going to be made available to the buyer's side so that you can confidently and conclusively decide how risks will be shared, how risks will be transferred, and how the security items can be managed from source to the destination, that is the buyer's site. However, regardless of the advantages of the competitive negotiation approach, it has certain disadvantages. One of which is include it may not achieve transparency because in the end there might be certain build up of course that is incorporated by either the procuring entity and supplier or even among suppliers who are being negotiated with. The negotiation process might be time wasting because in this instance, if the outcome is not conclusive or if the outcome doesn't or fail to come out with a successful supplier or tenderer, it means the process has been effortless. And prices may be more expensive compared to competitive tender because, as I said, they can be certain factors might be incorporated by the suppliers which they may not have foreseen if they decided to engage in competitive tender. So, in engaging in competitive negotiation, there are certain steps which needs to be followed. The first includes selection of sufficient number of firms to negotiate with. Then negotiations are carried out with each bidder whose bid falls within the preset competitive range, and then you invite suppliers to submit the best and final offers. Then you finally award the contracts to the bidder who offers the most advantageous price, quality, and service combination. How can you then make negotiation or competitive negotiation successful? You have to diagnose the situation, determine what is required, how can it be required, how to best meet the needs, the time frame, the thresholds, and everything. Then accurately analyze buyer expectations. So, in order to prepare for negotiation, the suppliers have to ensure that they are aware of what the buyers are likely to demand from them and prepare accordingly. Then assess the bargaining power of all parties involved in negotiation. So you have to determine your current stance. That do you look attractive to the buyer or not in terms of finances and capacity? Then you have to determine the buyer. Do you think the buyer will look attractive to you or not? You have to assess all these bargaining powers and determine who is likely to exercise leverage over the other. Then set objectives for the negotiations. Identify or determine ideal outcomes. Identify or determine realistic outcomes. And identify and determine fallback strategies. What is the next best alternative that you are going to fall on, assuming your selected strategy fails you in the negotiation process? Then decide on the negotiation strategy that you are going to adopt in the competitive negotiation approach. Then recognize the trading factors. That is the things that the buyer can trade and things that the supplier can provide or give up. Thank you.